What is going on, geeks? Noah Jive from the Geek Week here, and we are back with another review. Oh yeah, and strap up, because this time around, our endeavors bring us somewhere we really don't visit nearly enough. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is of course, Bollywood. Now, for the unfamiliar, Bollywood is the popular alias for Hindi cinema, the film industry based in Mumbai. Well known for its films featuring larger-than-life heroes, formulaic storylines, and over-the-top and at a lot of times, very innovative CGI. Being the most popular Indian film genre in India and abroad, speaking purely on the quantity of films produced and released each year, Bollywood is the world's largest film industry. Now, myself personally, I'm no stranger to the industry, having seen a number of Bollywood flicks over the years, and out of all the films I've seen, seldom do I not find them to be an enjoyable experience, whether it be ironically or unironically. Now, one thing I don't typically walk away captivated by, however, is those storylines. That is, until now. Today, our journey has brought us to Kalki 2898 AD. The sci-fi action film was directed by Nag Ashwin and released on June 27, 2024. Now, going into this film, I was fully expecting to have a great time, but I was genuinely, and I mean genuinely, surprised at how much I enjoyed the plot to this film. While the dialogue was very reminiscent of something of an MCU movie, and the character building left a lot to be desired, to say the least, the plot was actually tremendous. The film echoes inspiration from things like The Terminator, with the idea of the mother facing the apocalypse, destined to give birth to the savior of the universe, while at the same time, its lead antagonist and his subsequent overruling empire echoes inspiration from none other than George Lucas. Hell, thematically speaking, there's even shades of Frank Herbert's work shining through. However, it does all that while drawing most of its inspiration from Hindu scriptures. In fact, before we get started on the breakdown, it might not be such a bad idea to gloss over some of those aspects of Hinduism briefly, as I'm sure it'll make the plot much simpler to understand. So the first thing we should probably cover is a yuga. In Hindu cosmology, a yuga is a unit of time that lasts a multiple of 432,000 years, or 1,000 divine years. A yuga cycle is comprised of 4 yugas. The first being Krita Yuga, which lasts 1,728,000 years, or 4,800 divine years. The second being Treta Yuga, lasting a period of 1,296,000 years, or 3,600 divine years. The third is the Dvapara Yuga, lasting a period of 864,000 years, or 2,400 divine years. And the final being the Kali Yuga, lasting a period of 432,000 years, or 1,200 divine years. The total length of a yuga cycle is 4,320,000 years, or 12,000 divine years. Each yuga is associated with the decline in dharma and an increase in suffering and spiritual decay. Now, the most important takeaway here is after the Kali Yuga ends, the world is destroyed and another cycle begins after a period of quiet. Next, we should briefly touch on the Trimurti, the 3 gods responsible for creation, maintenance, and destruction of the world in Hinduism. Our focus will mostly be on the god Vishnu, as he is the most prominent throughout this story, although the other 2 gods, Brahma and Shiva, are referenced often throughout the film. Now, Vishnu is the supreme being in the largest branch of Hinduism. He is known as the preserver and the protector of the universe. But the one fact about this deity that is likely the most relevant to this film are the many incarnations Vishnu has taken. The Hindu scriptures speak of 10 avatars taken on by the god, each with its own distinct form and purpose. The myths associated with each avatar reference a specific time when they were most needed by humanity. The first avatar is Matsya, or the fish, sometimes depicted as just that, or sometimes a human torso connected to the tail of a fish. Now, Matsya is said to be the avatar that rescued the first man, as well as a great many other creatures, from the Great Flood. The second avatar is Kurma, or the tortoise. This avatar, usually depicted in a mixed human-animal form, relates to the myth of churning the ocean to obtain treasures dissolved in the ocean milk. Vishnu would take the form of a tortoise, of which he could support the giant turning stick on his back. The third avatar is Varaha, or the boar, depicted as either a full boar or a half-human mix. Now Vishnu took this incarnation to raise the earth from the bottom of the sea after it had been dragged down there by the demon Hiranyaksha. The fourth avatar is Narasimha, or the man-lion, and it relates to the legend of Vishnu taking the form of a man-lion to slay the demon Hiranyakshipu when the demon began to cause trouble on both heaven and on earth. The fifth avatar is Vamana, or the dwarf. This refers to the dwarf that appeared when the demon king Bali ruled the universe. In this form, Vishnu is able to trick the demon king into surrendering his rule as he banishes him to the underworld. The sixth avatar is Parasurama, or the angry man. As Parasurama, Vishnu appears as a priest who comes to the world to kill bad kings and protect humanity from danger. The seventh avatar is Lord Rama, or the perfect man. Often depicted with blue skin and with a bow and arrow equipped, Rama was sent by the gods to do battle with the multi-headed demon Ravana. Now, the eighth avatar makes a direct appearance in the film, and that is Krishna, or the divine statesman. Now, Krishna is one of the most widely revered deities in Hinduism. He is depicted in a variety of ways because of the vast amount of stories that surround him in particular, but we will be revisiting him soon, so just a moment. The ninth avatar is Balarama, or Krishna's elder brother. Rarely is he worshipped independently, but the stories always focus on his prodigious strength, usually depicted with pale skin in contrast to Krishna's blue. The 10th and final avatar of Vishnu is Kalki, or the mighty warrior. Now, Kalki obviously will be a major role in this story, but for now, it is said that Kalki is not expected to appear until the end of the Kali Yuga, which, if you recall, is the final yuga within the cycle that ends with the world being destroyed before starting anew. It is said that Kalki will rid the world of oppression by unrighteous rulers. He'll appear riding a white horse and carrying a fiery sword. The final thing we'll talk about briefly before really diving into this is the Kurukshetra War, as it is central to the plot of this film. Now, the Kurukshetra War derives from the epic Hindu poem, the Mahabharata. The poem depicts the dynastic struggle between two groups of cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, as they battle for the throne of Hastinapura. Alright, I think that should do as far as formalities go. Let's dive in to Kalki 2898 AD.
Can't you hear the wind calling? Little Miss can't be wrong. We're free. We are the future.
Watch this. Watch this.
Despite the title of the film, our story actually begins in 3102 BC, and in the midst of the previously mentioned Kurukshetra War. Remaining faithful to the poem at this point, we are introduced to Ashwatthama, a warrior of tremendous strength and ability as he fights alongside the Kauravas in their family struggle against their cousins, the Pandavas. At this point, we see Ashwatthama use a mysterious jewel embedded within his forehead to shoot a magic arrow, fatally striking Uttara, the princess of Matsya. And to make matters worse, she is pregnant with her son, the last surviving heir to the throne of Hastinapur. Miraculously, the two are rescued from certain demise by a divine intervention, and that divine being is none other than Krishna, the eighth incarnation of Vishnu. Krishna would go on to berate Ashwatthama for stooping so low as to try and assassinate a pregnant mother and her child, calling his actions the most despicable throughout a war that was full of heinous and violent acts. Ashwatthama initially attempts to fight the deity, only to submit after finding his actions futile. Krishna forcibly removes the magic gem from Ashwatthama's head, and Ashwatthama is certain his life will end. It is then that Krishna informs him that death will not be his punishment. No, death will be his salvation. Krishna puts a curse on Ashwatthama, that makes him immortal and condemns him to roam the earth, witnessing humanity's misery as a result of societal and moral deterioration during the Kali Yuga. He tells him the only way to break the curse is by protecting the mother of Kalki, Vishnu's 10th and final incarnation, that will appear towards the end of the Kali Yuga. And if he does not, he will be forced to repeat the cycle until the end of the next Kali Yuga. Now, what came after was actually an animated intro depicting the very many miseries of man, including, but not limited to, slavery, the Holocaust, homicide, and so much more. I thought it was a very interesting touch to add it to the film as an intro. Definitely wanted to add that in. Now, our present story would begin 6,000 years later, in, you guessed it, 2898 AD. The world, for the most part, has become a desolate wasteland, and Kashi stands as the last known city in the world. As the last known civilization in a dystopian society, you'd hope Kashi was a place of refuge. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Kashi is dominated by Supreme Yaskin, a 200-year-old ancient totalitarian god king. Yeah. Oh, and that's not even the good bit. He does all this from a palace aptly named the Complex, which in reality is a massive megastructure in the shape of an inverted pyramid that floats above the city. We'd later learn the megastructure sucks up energy from the planet in order to do so, but a giant floating pyramid palace is still pretty dope. At any rate, a super cool floating pyramid doesn't brighten up this dark society one bit, as we'd find fertile female refugees in Kashi are either sold or taken by force to the complex for something known as Project K. Now, Project K consists of the female subjects being artificially inseminated in an experiment to produce a secret serum. Now, the biggest issue that the scientists on Project K have encountered so far is that none of the subjects have survived long enough to reach the 150-day target, nor have any survived the extraction process. And yes, I'm aware of what I just said. Yes, I'm aware that sounds insane. And yes, we'll be getting back to this in just a moment. Speaking of refugees, as the story really starts out, we see a shuttle of refugees on its way to Kashi. On board, we're introduced to a young boy named Raya and an elderly man named Rumi. As the two have a conversation, through Rumi, we learn not only do the citizens of Kashi that live below the complex live in poverty, we also learn that Raya is actually a young girl disguised as a boy. Well, you know, for obvious reasons. Another thing Rumi explains in his conversation with Raya is the appearance of a certain star, more specifically, the Kagda Ashwini, a star that appears every 6,000 years and is the mark of the eclipse, or the darkest day. Not thinking much of it, Raya takes notice and the shuttle makes its way to Kashi. Once there, we are immediately introduced to the Raiders, militaristic-like bounty hunters that work for the complex. And without hesitation, we see them begin to separate the female refugees from the males, and begin to start scanning their stomachs with a device designed to detect fertility. One of the raiders makes it known that fertile females are worth 10,000 units if turned into the governing complex. At that point, we see a young boy that was sat next to Raya on the shuttle and overheard her conversation with Rumi step forward and try to exchange her for reward money. Luckily, Raya was a few steps ahead, and when he looks where she was standing, she's no longer there as she ran away. She is pursued closely by raiders and just narrowly escapes when Rumi would lead Raya to a tunnel where several other people are hiding already. And it's at this point we learn that Rumi and the others that were in the tunnel are actually rebels that have defected from the complex, now hailing from a hidden city known as Shambala. Raya's suspicion is put to rest when Rumi introduces her to a pregnant woman that they rescued from the complex. It's then we learn that the rebels of Shambala are awaiting a sacred prophet to put an end to Yaskin's tyranny, as we see Rumi place a mysterious compass on the refugee's womb. Rumi states that if pregnant with the prophet, the compass will light up from within. Unfortunately, the compass does not light up, and at this moment we hear another rebel named Viren tell him that it'll never work. Rumi assures the young woman that it's okay that she's not carrying the life of the prophet, and carrying any life in this society is a very special thing. When suddenly, their hideout is attacked by the raiders. Raya and a handful of rebels manage to escape, but sadly, Rumi and the young pregnant female are captured and made to stand before Commander Manas, one of Yaskin's commanding officers. And, yeah, Commander Manas is about as twisted as you'd expect, as we hear him threaten to take the girl back to the complex if they don't reveal the coordinates to the hidden city of Shambala. When they both refuse, we see them both killed by Commander Manas. Now, in a change of pace, the first of many in regards to this character, we are introduced to Bhairava in his AI-enhanced supercar, Bougie, as we see the pair chase down a man who has a bounty for being a rebel. While in the midst of detaining his bounty, the pair are interrupted by a group of raiders looking to do the same exact thing, and Bhairava, in his very Star-Lord-esque fashion, is able to knock out the raiders and take the rebel captive back to his place. Now, I warned you we'd be back to this, so if you're still vibing with me, that's on you. We get our first in-depth look into one of the floors of the complex, specifically the one holding Project K. The setup is eerily similar to a concentration camp, or at the very least, a maximum security prison. The women are either locked up in cages or work around the facility tending to the women locked up in cages. The fertile women at the facility are all made to wear white, the others in black, only identified by their subject numbers. We are introduced to a sterile test subject, or so it is believed, named SUM-80, as we see her consoling a fertile subject, now 91 days pregnant. Though still 60 days shy of the project goal, that's 150 days, she is by far the only subject to make it this long. When this information finds its way to Commander Manas, who is visiting the floor to observe the experiment's progress, he demands that the test subject be pulled early and extracted for serum at the request of the Supreme Ruler Yaskin. Sadly, the woman does not survive the extraction process, and we see her body dumped down a chute that leads to an incinerator alongside many others. Yes, an incinerator. After the extraction, Commander Manas directs the lead scientist on Project K to hand him the serum extracted. As he's doing so, the lead scientist asks Manas what the serum is even for. When Manas refuses to answer, the scientist begins to question whether Commander Manas actually is aware of its intended use. At that point, the scientist tells Commander Manas the project will never be successful if he doesn't have a better idea of Supreme Yaskin's intended outcome. He insists that Manas take him before the Supreme Ruler Yaskin so he can ask him for more guidance with the project. Commander Manas agrees, and they head to meet with Yaskin. On the way, we are introduced to Yaskin's second in command, Counselor Bani. As the trio reach the top floor of the complex, we are introduced formally to Supreme Ruler Yaskin, and he is very much the godlike figure described, as we see the man meditating while hovering over a pool of water. Manas presents him with the premature serum extracted from the test subject, and after Yaskin injects it into his body, he falls into the water below, appearing to have died. Turns out what the scientist handed Manas was not actually the extracted serum, but actually a very potent poison in an attempt to assassinate Yaskin. When this inevitably fails, and Yaskin rises from the water, he asks the scientist why he tried to kill him, and the scientist replies that he did it for the greater good. And now is probably as good a time as any to point out that Yaskin probably had some of my favorite lines throughout the entire film. Now, in reply to the scientist, Yaskin asks the scientist, "Do you know how many lives have been taken by the greater good throughout history?" The greater good changes every time that kings and kingship changes. He goes on to explain that humans will never really change and are defected by design, flawed by creation. He tells him that the serum he's been working on for Project K is a cure to that flaw. He then tells Commander Manas to find him a test subject that can last the 150-day period, and he and Counselor Bani leave, as we see the Supreme Ruler Yaskin straight up force choke the life out of the scientist. Now, back to the test subject SUM80 for a moment. If you weren't really picking up what I was putting down earlier, at this point it's made perfectly clear that SUM80 is actually pregnant. And not only that, she's 5 months pregnant, making her the only test subject to make it the 150-day period after injection. We learned she was sold to the complex by her father as a child, and this captivity is all she's ever known. She's managed to hide her pregnancy up until this point, but every day gets harder and harder, and that's amplified further when Supreme Ruler Yaskin gives an order to have all the females at the complex deemed sterile retested for fertility. SUM80 knows her days are numbered. In another change of pace, we return to Bhairava, as we see his rebel captive try to convince him to join their cause. He refuses, and shortly after we are introduced to his friend and possibly love interest, Roxy. When Bhairava learns Roxy has just landed a new job working up in the complex, he begs her to take him with her, as it's his dream to work in the floating megastructure. Roxy agrees, and she takes Bhairava with her as a guest on a day of work at the complex. The floor Roxy works on contains the generator that powers the megastructure. She explains to Bhairava that the generator sucks up all the energy from the Earth in order to reduce power. Within a few minutes, Bhairava is bored, and the two begin to explore the floors of the complex. One floor contains not only a beach, but a literal city, as the two, against better judgment, go in and begin to explore. And instead of laying low-key, the two decide to go to a lavish and elegant house party, only for Bhairava to be caught and kicked out of the complex. Meanwhile, while all this had been happening, Raya is still very much on the run, hiding from raiders, and now once again, all alone. One thing I failed to mention earlier is back when she and the rebels were hiding out in the tunnel and were subsequently attacked by raiders, before being captured, Rumi actually dropped his magic compass that he was using to see if the pregnant refugee was carrying the prophet. Upon hitting the floor, it would crack open, revealing a gemstone at the center. Thinking it might be worth something, Raya grabbed it and made a run for it. Now, fast forward back to the present, as she is spotted again by more raiders, and this time, a bounty-hunting robot, as we see the robot begin to chase her. She manages to make it into a tunnel where she is then rescued by a mysterious man who destroys the robot with ease. The man is none other than Ashwatthama, and with Raya in front of him, Ashwatthama sees the familiar magic gem in her possession. He remembers words once told to him by Krishna. When this gem makes its way back to you, it is time. Now back inside the complex, SUM80 is outed by her friend for being pregnant, and soon after, she is captured and begins being prepped for her serum extraction. And just as soon as she is in the machine and the extraction process begins, the power to the machine cuts out, and the very same friend she thought to have betrayed her saves her at the last moment. Turns out her friend was actually an undercover rebel from Shambala, as we see her use the power outage as an opportunity to lead SUM80 to safety. When escaping proves to be impossible for the both of them to do, the rebel would actually sacrifice her own life to give SUM80 time to escape through a tunnel where more rebels are awaiting her arrival. Now on her way out, SUM80 triggers a lockdown protocol on the complex, a flamethrower booby trap. Man, I just wanted to say booby trap. And in that moment, something miraculous happens. SUM80 actually walks through the fire unharmed, immediately passing out after, but walks through the fire unharmed. She is gathered by Viren and other rebels as they escape the complex, although not before Manas is able to secure one drop of serum that was extracted in the brief moments SUM80 was still in the machine. Now around this same time, Counselor Bani is alerted to a gigantic bow that has been dug up from beneath the earth. He instructs those responsible for finding it to bring the gigantic bow to him. As the runaway shuttle heads for the hidden city of Shambala, we are introduced to two rebels alongside Viren, an engaged couple, Kira and Aju. Kira immediately takes a liking to SUM80, as together they come up with a proper name for her, Sumati. I probably should have mentioned as soon as they escaped the complex, a bounty of 1 million units was put out for Sumati's capture and return. Sure enough, it doesn't take very long for raiders to get on their tail, as a group of raiders begin to pursue the rebel craft. They are able to fend off the raiders chasing them, but sadly, at the cost of Kira's life. We also learn that Bhairava is among the bounty hunters to catch wind of the bounty on Sumati, and him and Bougie are not far behind. When that rebel craft is stopped yet again by raiders, this time, Aju is shot, and just before anyone else can be hurt, Ashwatthama arrives, with his herald in tow, Raya. Now, with his magic gemstone again embedded within his head, Ashwatthama is able to see that Sumati is in fact the mother of Kalki. After taking out the raiders quite easily, the two come face to face, and just before anything is said, Bhairava and Bougie arrive, and they take out some raiders on their own before Bhairava and Ashwatthama have what can only be described as an epic anime battle showdown, which ends with Ashwatthama emerging victorious. Meanwhile, that massive bow that's in Counselor Mani's possession begins to exude a mysterious energy and becomes impossible to touch. As this is occurring, Counselor Mani is becoming aware of what's actually happening, as he's understanding prophecies are beginning to come true. He tells Commander Manas about the star and that it is an omen for the darkest day in 6,000 years. If Sumati's baby is not born by then, the Kagda Ashwini will not appear again for another 6,000 years. Viren, Aju, Sumanti, Ashwatthama, and Raya all make it to the hidden city of Shambala. Immediately it is apparent that the city consists of people of all races and all walks of life. At first, there are a few who are skeptical about the legitimacy of Sumati's arrival, but it doesn't take long for them to accept her as the Mother of God, returned to give birth. Bhairava, on the other hand, ended up being banned from the complex and complex work as a result of him interfering with the raiders that were chasing Sumati. In an effort to stay in good graces with the complex, Bhairava convinces Commander Manas that he is the only person capable of taking down the mighty Ashwatthama in bringing Sumati back. Commander Manas would eventually give in, and he allows Bhairava the chance to redeem himself. Shortly after, when he returned home, we would see that he was still holding that same rebel captive. He frees him and proceeds to trick him into bringing him to Shambala with him on the side of the rebel forces. After making a few bank-emptying alterations to his car Bougie, the two head out in the direction of Shambala. In a conversation with Raya, Ashwatthama explains how he actually lost the war 6,000 years prior, and he was defeated by Arjuna. More importantly, that the cane that he holds isn't actually a cane at all. It's a weapon belonging to his brother. Despite him trying to use the weapon, it only really works in his brother's hands. Shortly after that, Ashwatthama would go on to speak with Sumati, who is not only scared for her and her child's life, but also questioning why it's her that's chosen for this task. Ashwatthama consoles her and ensures her that he will protect her. Now, Bhairava's now free rebel companion would lead him directly into Shambala, and once there, you guessed it, he would promptly take that rebel out and the guard escorting them, as he and Bougie now go off to look for Sumati. Before finding her, however, he would come face to face with Ashwatthama, as the two prepare to fight yet again. And just as the round 2 of that epic fight is about to go down, the barrier to Shambala is breached, as we see Commander Manas and the complex army begin to lay siege to the city. All-out war ensues, and the city of Shambala is destroyed in the process. Bhairava is able to get the upper hand on Ashwatthama by transforming Bougie into, well, a transformer, although Ashwatthama would ultimately win again. Manas is able to capture Sumati in the meantime, and while doing so, he's able to subdue Ashwatthama. And as Commander Manas is moments away from getting away with Sumati, suddenly, as Bhairava makes contact with Ashwatthama's brother's staff, something awakens within him. And fueled by this new power, Bhairava is able to rescue Sumati and straight up obliterate Commander Manas in the process. Unfortunately, after doing so, Bhairava snaps out of the trance that he was in, realizing he's holding the girl that he came there for, and having no recollection of what just happened, he takes off. Ashwatthama, still unable to comprehend what he just saw, begins to refer to Bhairava as Karna, descendant of the sun, or his brother. And finally, in the closing moments of the film, we return to Supreme Ruler Yaskin, as we see Counselor Bani explain how they were only able to extract 1 drop of serum from the 150-day test subject, or Sumati. Counselor Bani hands Yaskin the serum, and unlike before, when Yaskin injects this vial, we see his body rejuvenate as he becomes healthy and strong in appearance. So strong, in fact, he is even able to pick up that gigantic bow that was previously untouchable. At that point, he tells Counselor Bani not to worry, that he'll go capture Sumati himself. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where our story comes to a close. And boy, do we got a bit to unpack. Now, first things first, I had to get a full breakdown in because, like I said earlier, the one thing I expected to be the least captivating was actually the most. Personally, being someone who's much more knowledgeable on Greek and Norse mythology, hell, I've even dabbled in Egyptian mythology over the years, but I've never actually taken the time to explore Hindi mythology, and I found it to be absolutely fascinating. From a cinematography standpoint, the CGI can be a bit overbearing at times. I mean, make no mistake, I feel there were more than a few CGI shots that look great, but in a science fiction film of this tone, I feel they could have utilized a lot more practical effects to really make some of the settings look more authentic. Now, that being said, I don't think the CGI looks any worse than any MCU film, while being done with a third of the budget, mind you, but just keep that in mind for now. Speaking of tone, why don't we explore that for a moment? The film, of course, has a very dark tone. Given the storyline being told, that should come as no surprise. Essentially, we had a story with 4 separate storylines that would eventually converge. Ashwatthama's story is the first. We are introduced to Raya shortly after. Following that, we'd see Bhairava, and then Eshu-Amedi. But I made sure to point this out at every opportunity so we could talk about it now. Firstly, I feel like the story maybe had one too many storylines going on coherently, making it a bit hard to follow. I thought it was a lot more fluent in Acts 2 and 3 as opposed to Act 1. Now, each individual storyline is pretty essential to the plot, so it'd be hard to remove any one. But I'll just say this, 3 of 4 storylines match the film well. But Bhairava's scenes feel like we're switching to a completely different film every time they come in. Now, just to be clear, his scenes are 110% what I was expecting the rest of the film to be like, but it couldn't be further from what it was. It's clear outside of his plot relevance he was being used as some sort of comedic relief, but did it really need to be this excessive? I mean, for me at least, the over-the-top goofy CGI fight scenes 9 times out of 10 are what I come to see when I'm watching a Bollywood flick. But a film with this good of a story, to me, just kind of felt unnecessary. In fact, I don't even think really half the fight scenes that were in the film needed to be in the film. Now, like anybody else, I totally understand wanting to add that blockbuster appeal to a film, but when it comes at the price of altering the film's tone, straight up making a traumatic scene seem comical, I'm not sure it's necessary. For example, take the scene where the rebels are taking Sumati to Shambala and are attacked by the raiders for the first time. The scene where Kira sacrifices her life to save Sumati isn't nearly as dramatic as it should be. In fact, it's truly, unimaginably corny. Like, cringe really isn't even the word. The horrible dialogue, the lackluster fight choreography, the blatant use of CGI, I mean, the scene looks like it was honestly ripped right out of the current MCU. And I bet you're probably wondering why I keep bringing that up. Well, obviously the sequel to this film is on the way. I mean, it's called Kalki and we haven't even met Kalki yet. But what's more is this film is the first in a planned Kalki cinematic universe. Words that absolutely terrify me nowadays. At any rate, the random jumps to an action comedy with Bhairava were a bit distracting to say the least. Despite all of that, I do truly believe this film has more good things to offer than it does the latter. And I'm genuinely curious to see what happens in the next film. Now, I really can't express how interesting I found the plot to be. As someone who's really looking at the writing mostly, like I said, the dialogue left a lot to be desired. There really wasn't much character building. This is more so a plot-driven story. But with a plot like this, it works. It definitely works. I thoroughly enjoyed my time not only researching for this review, but watching this film. I enjoyed it, and I cannot wait for the second installment. The movie comes in at a hefty 3 hours, but if you've got the time, I'd certainly recommend it. Kalki 2898AD gets a 7.7 out of 10. Have any of you guys seen Kalki 2898AD? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about it. I'd love to hear what you thought. I mean, I was truly impressed with the plot to this film. And I was just really taken away by Hindi mythology in general. It was the first time I've really delved into it, and I had a ton of fun doing it. If anybody else is well versed in Hindi mythology, please feel free to get in the comments. I'd love to learn more. But as always, guys, that's it until next time. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.
I'll take it, and I don't need a bag. I'm gonna wear this home.